Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be going through the Building Estimator program. I'll show you how to create estimates and give a brief overview for all the categories you'll have to answer for. Your building estimate's important because obviously you want to get the right amount of insurance. If you have too much insurance, you probably won't be price competitive on new business quotes. If you have too low a limit and there's fire that takes out the building, or when there is a claim that takes out the entire structure, if there's not enough coverage, they're going to come back to you and wonder why you didn't suggest a higher limit. It is an estimate, it's not an exactment. That's quoting Bruce, but we are trying to get as close as possible to the actual replacement cost. The estimating program was created by a company called Marshall, Swift and Beck. They are the gold standard of replacement cost estimators. A lot of professional appraisers use their system. However, I like to remind people that I am not a professional appraiser. I am a professional insurance agent. I feel confident in the things I'm putting in there. With the estimate, it's a professional program, but I am not a professional appraiser. So I do give that disclaimer. You saw me just click the plus mark. If you want to create an estimate this way, you can do it here. You can also go in, and if there's a quote here, there should be an option to create an estimate or go into the building estimator. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to create a new estimate to play around with. So the first thing you want to do is add a building. The first field you'll see is the type of building. This is for how the building was originally constructed. It is not an indication of how it is currently used. So if a church purchases a house and uses it as a fellowship hall or for classrooms, you will still want to choose residential since it was originally constructed as a house. However, if it was originally constructed as a shed or an outbuilding, that's what's going to be incidental, or garages fit here. Commercial is going to be most of your standard structures that churches own. The church building itself is a commercial building. Fellowship hall, or building built as a fellowship hall, is a commercial building. A gymnasium is a commercial building. School classrooms are going to fall under this commercial as well. Most of your larger buildings will be commercial, and the option you choose here will impact the next screen. So I'm going to choose commercial for now. We're going to say one section. You can always add sections later. Current use of the building, and here you can see all the different options. The most standard options you're going to choose are going to be things such as church, church office, school, storage, youth building. What you choose for the current use of building will feed through to the account center, and that description will show up there. However, it does not impact the actual estimate itself. Location number and building number depends on the policy. Usually you start with location 1, building 1. If you have a new address, it's a new location. So that's how you end up with location 2, 3, 4, on down the road. I'm going to choose a Hagerstown zip code. But you'll want to use the zip code where the building is located. If it's on the historic registry, you can put this. I usually do not include the purchase price or date of purchase or any comments about the building. But if it is on the historical registry, you will want to note that for underwriting, because buildings that are on the historical registry have to be rebuilt exactly how they were. This often requires a higher cost of reconstruction. There's also a list of historic places. That's different. The historical registry is referring to the registry where the exterior has to stay the same, and the historical society will make sure it's rebuilt how it was. You probably won't see too many things on historical registry, but it's good to go over that. And now, once we go to the next screen, you'll see you have more options here for selecting a category for what type of building. Obviously, church facilities are going to include all your church buildings. It's going to include fellowship halls. It's going to include gymnasiums. School buildings, occasionally you'll use, if you're quoting a school, you'll use this for the different options you see here. Note that you can also add a section, so you could have 3 sections in a building. You could have one section be the traditional church, one section being a gymnasium, and then another section being average with classrooms. So within this, you could have 3 different building descriptions. And to differentiate between church basic, church average, church contemporary, church elaborate, if you're not clear, you can always click this definition button and they'll show you a picture. So here's an elaborate facility as opposed to a contemporary building, as opposed to contemporary high. Most of the churches I encounter are average with classrooms, sometimes traditional, sometimes contemporary. So those are probably the three you bounce between. For the sake of this video, I'll use church average with classrooms. You want to use the year constructed. If the building was built in multiple sections, you'll want multiple sections for your estimate. If you're not sure how many sections it was built, it's not the end of the world. Typically, it's going to go back to the oldest year on the estimate. So you'll want to know the original year constructed. A lot of churches have a cornerstone that say what year the building was built. Year of the roof is important because if an older roof will get the ACV roof endorsement, and that significantly reduces the payout if the damage happens to the roof from a storm and it was an older roof. So you'll want to ask for the year of the roof. If you click unknown, it will use the year constructed. So it'll say this is a 1960 building with a 1960 roof, which is going to set off red flags in underwriting. Number of stories in section, should be able to figure that out. Average story height, you don't need to fill this in. I never fill in the average story height. It's not a required field. The required fields are all the ones with these stars. The next field you come to is the floor area and perimeter. You can get both these numbers from your apex. So if you look here on the apex, there's each floor was 10,501 square feet, including the basement. Well, the first floor was more. If you go down here, you can see square footage and the perimeter. But all these numbers will get used in our estimate. So 15,326. And so here you have it. I just used these same specs and entered them in here. So you'll see perimeter is here, square footage is here, and we're moving on. The next questions are about the building structure in the ISO construction class. If you are not sure what construction class to use, I did a video on determining ISO construction class. You should watch that video before this one. So for this building, see here, it's a joisted masonry structure. You could do average with classrooms. In this one, you could probably talk me into contemporary in terms of the building structure. And you can see that this has the first floor. This is the sanctuary here. They have windows up here and there's a balcony here, but this is all one story, whereas over here you have two stories and you get a basement. And the reason I classified this as a basement instead of another story is the ground level's here. So all this stuff is below grade over here. So this floor counts as a basement. Your replacement cost for basements is going to be a lot lower than the replacement cost for a separate story. So keep that in mind when you're choosing basement versus another story. So here we said it's a masonry structure. It is joisted masonry. You have concrete floor joists and a concrete floor deck. The way I know this is walking through the inside of the building. There's concrete walls. It's a concrete structure. It was built in the 60s. Concrete and steel is going to have less give than a wooden floor. If it feels a little bit, not spongy, that's the wrong term, or springy, but there's going to be more give in a wooden floor than a concrete floor. The floor joists and floor deck don't change the rate that's going to get charged, but it does change the amount for the replacement cost value. So this is going to affect your building value. It's not going to affect the rate that gets charged. For exterior wall surfaces, this is brick on masonry. And we should have a balcony in here too, because it does have a balcony. The roof joists are made of wood. If it's a joisted masonry structure, that means the roof joists are always wood. If it's a non-combustible structure, you're going to have steel beams as the roof. But you could also end up with concrete roof joists and a concrete roof deck if it's masonry non-combustible. You can have steel. but wood is going to be for any frame or joisted masonry structures. We have asphalt or fiberglass shingles on this building. Can't see very well because there's snow in the picture, but over in this corner you can see that it's shingles up there. If it was a slate roof, you're going to end up with a shinier stone looking. These are slate tiles up here. You can see that they just look different than a shingle, and actually this section of the roof might be asphalt or fiberglass shingles. It's easier to tell this in person, but most new construction uses asphalt or fiberglass shingles. A flat roof is often built up tar, rock, or smooth. Copper should be pretty evident when you see it. Single ply membranes are going to be used primarily on modular buildings. Slate is something you're going to see on more traditional buildings. It's got about 100-year lifespan. You've got to get up there and repoint them every year, but they do last a really long time. Asphalt or fiberglass shingles traditionally have lasted 25 to 30 years, but now they have architectural shingles that will last up to 50. Tile, clay, or concrete. Sometimes you'll see these, they'll be terracotta tiles where it's orange or another color like that. So I have seen those. That's a higher end covering. Same with wooden shingles. Those are also a higher end covering. If you're not sure, typically your insurance contact will have an idea of what's on their roof because they had to pay to put it up there. Moving on, are there laminated or wood beams? Typically you're going to answer no for this. Why this matters is a lot of older construction has really long wood beams that are more expensive to replace, or you have to use different techniques with modern construction. Then asks if there's sprinklers. You either say yes or no, and it needs to be at least, I think it's 60% to get a credit on the policy. Even if it's 40%, you'll want to put that in the estimate because it will impact the replacement cost, even if it doesn't impact the rate. If it is 100% coverage, then they will get a discount. There we go. The sprinkler credit is a pretty good credit. They'll get, I think it's 15 to 20% off the building rate. So keep an eye out for sprinklers because missing details like this can cost you a sale. It's also good to note that if they have sprinklers, they probably have to get them inspected every year or every few years. And they probably also have to carry a fire alarm that is centrally monitored. So you'll also want to make sure you get them that fire alarm credit. The reason for that is if the water pressure drops in the sprinklers, it's going to notify that company. If they have elevators, you'll want to mark that here. Yet again, we're trying to get to the replacement cost. So elevators cost extra money to put in a building. You'll want to include that in the estimate if they have them. Now we're on to determining construction quality. And some of this depends on the description you use. So since I chose average with classrooms, and let's go back to my picture here. As I said earlier, I could have chosen church traditional potentially, or contemporary, I mean, not traditional. However, since I chose average with classrooms, I'm going to come back with a higher construction quality. If I had chosen church contemporary, I would have done basic plus or something of that nature. Another thing I note here is for smaller buildings, they don't include contractor setup costs and some baseline costs in these estimates. So if it's a smaller building or a residential building, I inflate this because I want a higher limit, or I include the broad valuation because I want to make sure those contractor setup costs are covered if they have to go and rebuild the structure. It was a check-in building for a camp, and they spent $200,000 building this structure, and my building estimate was only $60,000. And the reason for that big difference was the contractor setup costs not being included in the estimate. So continuing on, we've got a basement. Since it's concrete all through the interior of that structure, it's a masonry non-combustible basement. The basement is finished. And since we said there's sprinklers above, we're saying there's sprinklers here. And I'm going to choose elaborate and or exposed. Going back to the picture. you can see that this lower part is all exposed. So when I chose exposed, that's why I did it. Other details. They obviously had a steeple. If they have a pipe organ, you'll want to include that. If they have a nice pulpit, you'll want to include that. If they have stained glass, I try and take a picture of every single stained glass window. I think that's good practice. In case there's a loss, then we have it on file what actually went down. Also, underwriting can see the stained glass. Estimating at Brotherhood can see the stained glass. I think it's just good to take pictures of every stained glass window since they're expensive and sometimes a sensitive topic when it comes to the insured. This church has pews. Say they have a porch too, commercial kitchen. If they have built-in electronics such as audio systems, speakers in the sanctuary, that type of thing, you can include this here. And you can play around with some of the other options if you're interested. I'll add them just so you can see what this does to the next screen. So everything you check there now pops up as a field over here that you're going to need to answer. And so with this steeple, going to look at it. It's actually a tower, not a steeple. So I probably should have had tower, but we'll just say it's a steeple, metal or plastic, and I'll just go with elaborate since it's bigger. As far as determining how the steeple was made, older construction is going to lean towards wood. Newer construction is going to lean towards metal or plastic. And if it's really traditional, elaborate, it could be a stone structure. Altars are usually made of wood. They could be made of stone. I've seen it occasionally. Baptistry, you're just being asked basic or elaborate. For the pipe organ, they will ask you for the number of ranks. And as you can see here, a rank is a set of pipes of the same type that form a tone. The number of ranks in an organ cannot be determined by visual inspection because the number of pipes for each tone varies and all pipes may not be visible within a sanctuary. So where does that leave us for determining number of ranks? If they have an organist, a lot of times organists will know the number of ranks. An organist, you will not have to explain what a rank is. If your contact is not an organist, they're not going to know what a rank is. I've gotten a lot of crazy looks when I ask people how many ranks their organ is. The other way I get to this amount is I'll ask them if they know how much the organ is worth. Because typically it's $15,000 to $20,000 per rank. So if they come back and say, oh, this is a $500,000 organ, well, you can do the math on how many ranks that is and at least play around with this estimate to get it close to that amount. Your more standard organs are going to be 10 ranks or less. So we'll use 10 here and you'll see how that impacts the estimate. Average pulpit. Now we're down to the stained glass and determining quality of the stained glass. Things that I look for include the color of it. If it has a lot of bright blues and reds and there are people or things happening as opposed to just basic colors, that's what's going to lead me towards superior versus simple. So here's one example of some stained glass. You can see there's blues and reds. Like I said, those are generally nicer things. However, there's not much going on inside this stained glass itself. And this building was built in the 60s, so it's more modern. For this, I'm going to use somewhere in the simple, probably simple high, and go through the other stained glass windows in this church. It's all pretty simple. There's nothing elaborate in there. Okay guys, here's some more stained glass. This building is a little bit of an older building. It was built in the 20s. And you can see a lot of those brighter blues. You have a little bit more detail going on, but it's not depicting a scene or anything there. So this one I would probably rate somewhere in the high standard or low superior type category. It's the same window. This one here, I wish we had a slightly better image of this, but you've got those same blues and reds. I would rate that back in that same superior low type category. That's a better picture of it. You can see the blues coming through. This is going to end up more in the simple. This is closer to painted glass. All still simple. The other thing to look out for is Tiffany windows, and you're not going to see too many Tiffany windows. Okay, here's some more examples of stained glass. You can see that there is a person here and a scene is being depicted, so these extra cuts are more intricate. While you don't have those same bright colors, you have more detail in what's going on. So that's going to also get me to that superior rating, probably superior low. This would probably be superior low or that standard high. Yet again, all this stained glass is pretty old, dates back to the 20s. You can see a lot of those brighter blues and reds, and there's a scene. Now we're starting to get in closer to superior high. And there you go. As far as Tiffany windows, here's a good picture of a Tiffany window. You can see, and it's actually right next to a standard superior type window. Tiffany was a manufacturer who is long out of business. So if you find a Tiffany window, you can't go out and order new Tiffany windows. So if something happens to this, their options are to replace it with a really nice window that looks like this window, but is used using modern construction techniques, or they can go buy a Tiffany window out of an old building. But you can't create new Tiffany windows, and usually your contact will know if it is manufactured by Tiffany. There's other famous manufacturers. There's one that's German who's even more expensive than the Tiffany windows. But if you're just looking at a window, the ways you can see that it's made by Tiffany, you've got the deeper blues and a greater variety in the blues. You've got the deeper reds. Those are apparently hard techniques to do. So these colors, you don't tend to see those in your standard windows, and that's evidenced by this window right next to it. That's it for stained glass. On the pews, I always make a good estimation of this. You know about how wide the sanctuary is. You can count the number of pews and get towards a rough estimate of the linear feet. So you'll want to enter that number here. Pine is going to be a lighter colored wood. Oak or walnut are darker colors. Same with the cherry or carved wood. Really, these two are more expensive. Pine is the cheap one. Here, if there's a porch, you add in the porch. And that also should be on your apex if there is a porch. Commercial kitchens cost money, so you'll want to include those. And if they have built-in electronics, you can include them here. And now we'll hit calculate. Oh, and I made a mistake. You can see that I didn't fill in the stained glass. So we're going to say they've got a standard amount. The other thing is, if you have pictures of the stained glass, you can calculate the square footage of it. Remember to calculate the square footage of a rectangular window. It's length times the width. And if it's a circular or rose window, pi r squared, so 3.14 times the radius of the window, so halfway to the center, squared. So if it's a 3 foot radius, it's 3 squared is 9 times 3.14. So there we go. We've got it calculated. And now the moment of truth, when you find out the estimate value. So you can see that we have a $6.5 million structure here. It's 37,000 total square feet. And the replacement cost per square foot is $242. If you're looking at a frame structure, I typically expect the replacement cost per square foot to be between 125 to 150. Remember that basements do not get included in the square footage calculated here. So if you have a basement, or if you have a lot of stained glass, or if you have a pipe organ, it's going to push this replacement cost per square foot out. I've seen $500 or $600 a square foot was the most I've seen, and that was a stone structure with a lot of stained glass and pipe organ. So those things can affect the replacement cost per square foot. But typically for frame buildings, it's between 125 and 150. If you go into a rural area, it can get below that. Joisted masonry is going to be more expensive than frame. That's probably putting it in the $150 to $200 a square foot range. Masonry non-combustible is going to be your most expensive structures. Those often are generally above $200 a square foot in replacement cost. If something doesn't look right, I come back and look through all the details here. We all make mistakes. I have sometimes included the perimeter. The square footage is both the square footage and the perimeter, which jacked up my estimate. So if this number comes back and it's not what you expected it to be, maybe come back and look at some of the assumptions you used in the estimate. For this structure, it's probably close to reasonable. And this is why it's important to look at their current policy. If you can get current policy information, not that you're aiming to meet their current policy number here, but if it's pretty far off, you've got to have a reason why it's off. So it's okay to be off the number that's on their current policy. You'll just want to have a good explanation for why your number is different and why your number is better. If they're with Liberty Mutual and you know they've never done a replacement cost estimate, the number on their Liberty Mutual policy doesn't hold much merit. And at the time of a claim, there could be co-insurance penalties. So just because the number's on their policy currently doesn't mean that's what you're aiming for here. But if there is a huge variance, you'll want to investigate why that is and hear the estimate details or building survey. You'll see all the assumptions you've got in here. This is where you would come to look to see what shot up this number. I mean, if you entered in a crazy number of ranks in the organ, this number could be $800,000, and that's going to affect your estimate, or any number of things. So do a double check on this. Make sure it looks reasonable after you're done the estimate. So here you'll see a residential building has different options. There's less here. And this, we're going to say this is in Maryland. So you'll still need to know the year constructed. You'll still need to know the year of the roof. You'll still need to know the square footage. However, you don't need to know the perimeter. And there's now a field for attached garage, open covered porches. You're still doing your ISO construction class. You're going to do the home style. If it's a ranch or it's one story, you list how many stories are in it. Siding, the roof covering, the central air. If it's central air, you've got forced air or AC. Older buildings use heat pumps or separate ducts. Those are the radiators on the side. If they have extra bathrooms, you'll want to put that in here. And like I said before, this estimate can be a little low on smaller buildings, so I always go slightly higher on the construction quality. And there you go. We've got the second building in there. So you can see the replacement cost per square footage was a lot less for the parsonage than the church, which you would expect that since the parsonage I said was a frame structure and the church was joisted masonry, and churches tend to be more expensive to replace than your standard building. And then the one last category was incidental. Now keep in mind that you can't change the type of building once you created the estimate, so it's just a tassel if you have to go back and change it, because that involves deleting the building that you started and then creating a new one. So I do try and get this type of building right the first time. So we're saying they've got a garage. Also, if you write something here in the additional building description, this is actually what will show up on the policy. So don't put things like furball. Don't call a building this because it's going to show up on, furball will show up on the policy. You won't want to name it that. You will want to call it what they call it. So if they call it the red barn, feel free to put the red barn in here. This is what actually shows up on the policy. It feeds through to the account center. Here you go. All other areas. This frame garage. See, there's less construction quality options. And this overall condition, it's pretty obvious. You just, whatever the condition of the building is, that's what you're picking. And the red barn is by far the lowest per square footage. I'm going to go back into this because I went through that pretty quick. But there you go. Guys, that's everything for now in terms of a building estimator. If you do have questions on what you should be doing or on a specific estimate, feel free to reach out to me or another member of the team with questions. Otherwise, happy hunting, guys.